Hi everyone, I'm back with another video from the Season 6 PTR. Today I want to talk about the Necromancer. I tried out the new Soulrift skill that has been quite hyped up when the PTR launched and before that. And I do have to say it is actually a very cool tool for Necromancers. I tried it mostly in endgame as like a real carry skill, so this is actually a Soulrift build that is T100 pit viable, which is the highest difficulty in the game in Season 6 right now. So for PTR standards, this is actually a very strong setup. Not even the strongest that Necro can make. They are generally looking pretty good. And it just feels pretty fun. It's a very unique setup that I want to dive in and show you what it's all about. Personally, I had a really good time with this. I also played some other stuff on the Necromancer, especially Bone Spirit builds look very powerful. And now you may say, hey, this build has Bone Spirit on the bar, as you can see here. But the funny part is in this setup, we actually use Bone Spirit essentially just as a resource spending and generation tool. It doesn't actually do any damage here. This is all these big black explosions that you can see here popping off all the time. And it's basically a black blood surge nova that comes from the Soulrift skill itself together with the new helm, the Unmaker. That is a unique helm that goes with the Soulrift skill and kind of gives you this extra explosions every time you spend a certain amount of resources. So the idea here is that I use a rune combo to snapshot 100% crit and 100% overpower into the Soulrift skill, which lasts a quite long time. And then every time you spend those resources, you get those pops, and they will constantly be crit and overpowered as long as the Soulrift is still up. So every time we cast Soulrift, similar to, for example, how Hurricane Druid works, we snapshot the crit overpower, and the entire skill will then overpower and crit whenever you get those pops. And the rest is just kind of, okay, we're cursing, and then we spam as much as possible our Bone Spirit in order to spend our resources and then with the Unmaker Helm trigger those explosions. So I wasn't really sure like ahead of time how strong this would turn out to be, but it turns out it is pretty good actually. This is a very competitive high-end setup here that is mildly clunky to play because of this timing involved with the crit overpower snapshot. Here, for example, you see one of those cases where I just messed it up and I just like completely stopped doing damage because it turns out overpower is pretty strong in Season 6 with how the overpower formula works and how Blizzard has rebalanced life values. Overpower builds in general are just kind of like winners of this patch, and this kind of shows in some setups like this here, for example. So let's jump into the setup here and I'll show you what it's all about. I mentioned the Unmaker Helm and the new Soulrift Ultimate. You can now put points into Ultimate, so that's very useful to beef up its damage and also reduce the cooldown. You see here it has a 33 seconds base cooldown with 7 ranks. In the clip that I played, I actually only had +2 on my helm, not +7. So that would be quite helpful to actually make this build a lot stronger and a lot more consistent as well with the timing. But Soulrift kind of just does everything you ever wanted. Gives you damage, barrier, resources, and makes everything vulnerable. So it kind of just does everything. We also use the new Affliction key passive here. That is mostly just a 50% extra damage boost. It has this extra curse effect, but I don't care about that. And those two together are basically our damage here. And as I mentioned, the way that this works is with the Unmaker Helm, you need to get that item in order to make this setup, because it has this effect where when you spend essence, first of all, you extend the duration of Soulrift, so it can last something like 15 to 20 seconds or so, pretty reliably. And then you also have this, every 30 essence you gain while it's active, you explode with this 200% extra damage. So the idea is that you get like, basically 100 essence plus per cast of Bone Spirit and just kind of spam it away. And for example, here with Shattered Spirit Aspect, we can generate a lot of essence on top of the dreadful Bone Spirit that gives us the extra 30% generation. So we have a lot of generation, a lot of these Shattered Spirit hits here that generate a lot of these essence. We spend all of our essence every time we cast Bone Spirit, and with a bit of cooldown reduction and critting, we get to the point where Bone Spirit just has 0 cooldown. So even though we can spam it, we don't do damage with Bone Spirit, it's all the Unmaker. So this is how that works. So we put, for example, a bunch of Bone Spirit cooldown reduction here on our jewelry as a temper. And then you can also go like one hand off hand. For example, here I have a speed farming variant where you can get a bit of extra cooldown to make this like more smooth. But for like more of a push scenario, you don't need that. You can get away with just those 2 jewelry pieces. And then for maximum damage, for example, we have a Starless and we get tanky from Tyria's Might. Here's a Blood Moon Breaches, since we are overpowering, lots of damage on that thing. And the rest is, yeah, kind of just some extra damage bonus aspects. So we have the sacrificial aspect, we have very powerful sacrifice bonuses here with the shadow damage, then the overpower damage and the crit damage, and all these things scale to like crazy numbers with sacrificial plus Memento Mori. We have no minions in the setup. I have Inexorable Reaper. This is a movement aspect that was introduced, I think, in season 4 or 5. I really like that one, where you can also like much more easily position yourself in the middle of a pack or something. With the Sever, this is now a mobility skill. This is optional. There can be other things like a Cursed Aura or Concussive Strikes for some extra DPS. And here we have the Damned aspect. There's also a very powerful damage multiplier that goes on the neck. So every time we curse something, we get extra damned multiplier. There's also this new Paragon board. This is the Frailty board that is very powerful. That basically goes into every single Necro build in the future, I guess. That gives you also up to 40% extra damage against cursed enemies. And you also need it for Blood Moon Breaches. So cursing is very important. And then spamming away with your Bone Spirit. And that's pretty much it. So the only real difficult part about this build is, first of all, hitting 100% crit chance of your Bone Spirit. So that's kind of important. For example, we use the Grasping Wings aspect here to get extra crit. And then we can also invest into Inspiring Leader. So those two things give you plus 37% crit. And you see here, if you go 63 plus 37, that's 100. So you want to try to reach 100%. Because if you don't crit with your Bone Spirit, then you don't get a 7 seconds cooldown reset. And then you have a gap and you just can't really do much besides maybe spam your curse or something like that. So you have to do that. And then the other important thing, especially gameplay wise, is this activation of the Xan rune. So here, the next skill cast will be guaranteed crit and overpower. This is the main combo of how this whole setup works. You need to cast Soulrift when you have this buff and not cast anything else, because this buff can be consumed by, you know, even your curse, your blood mist, anything. So you have to kind of pay attention to that. You can see it on the bar. So I can open this again real quick and show this. But it's kind of important that you stand still exactly the right amount of time. So this will take, I think, roughly 8 seconds of standing still or so to activate this rune here, out of the around 20 seconds that the Soul Rift will last. So you have to stand still like roughly 40% of the time, depending on your Soul Rift duration. And the other time, yeah, either if you're just standing still, you can actually just kind of like let one of the buffs pass and then just go for the second round. Or if you like, for example, in a boss fight, you're dodging around a lot more, then you have to try to like stand still a little bit here and there, and otherwise kind of stay moving. But with a little bit of like muscle memory, you're gonna understand how long it will take. And then sometimes a quick look at the buff bar will show you. And it's very good because on the runes, they're always the first 2 buffs that you have on your buff bar. So it's relatively easy to see. So in like a gameplay scenario, you can see this here, there's the buff bar, and those 2 purple buffs here at the start, these are the runes. So one is the Warcry rune here that I have, just for extra damage, and the other one is the Xan rune. This is the one that stacks up slowly as I stand still here. I tried various forms of trying to proc this effect. For example, there are other ways to activate runes, like cast a skill with a cooldown, for example, since, for example, Bone Spirit has a cooldown. You're constantly spamming that. Or cast a core skill, Bone Spirit is a core skill. Or also the travel X meters. But I found that the standstill was actually kind of the most consistent one here, at least for like a push scenario where I do like tier 100s. That is different in like a speed farming scenario where I actually reverse this to the travel rune. So we have that somewhere here. Travel 5 meters, and then after traveling, I think 70 total or something, which is roughly like 3-4 screens, then you get this effect. Because, for example, in speedrunning, you just want to like run through the dungeon and then one-tap everything. You don't want to stand still. But for example, for pushing, this was different. So I found this to work the best. I also tried, for example, these other effects like cast a skill for cooldown, but it's very often happened that the skill that triggered the final, you know, like filling it up basically, would then also consume the buff immediately. So for example, when I casted a Bone Spirit, then sometimes Bone Spirit would just like give me the buff and instantly consume it. So that was a bit of a bummer. So I went with the standstill thing in the end. And that's pretty much it for the setup. So we have the Paragon boards here. Paragon boards are much simpler these days. So there's 5 boards here. They all kind of do something. So you have Blood Begets Blood with the blood orbs that mostly get created from corpse tendrils here. So they're going to be up in AoE, but not so much on a single target. Then we have Bloodbath, very powerful, the overpower damage here, since we overpower all the time. We have Scent of Death here with the extra corpse damage or damage reduction. And we have Frailty here, very powerful legendary node. And then a few glyphs that kind of like round up this setup here. So Darkness, Dominate, Essence, Eliminator. This is one of the new glyphs where you stack a lot of main stats. So this is a kind of generally pretty nice glyph, I think. And then here, Sacrificial, since you don't have any minions. You get a lot of damage buffs here. And with all of that stuff together, I was actually able to pop off with like somewhere in the range of like 300 to 500 million damage per pop. And sometimes you can get multiple pops in one go. So in the case of Unmaker, when you cast a Bone Spirit, you have spent at least 100 essence. And this means you get 3 of those explosions at the same time. So potentially like up to 1 billion or so per Bone Spirit cast that you can do like multiple times per second with enough attack speed. So we also try to get a bit of attack speed, for example. And our gear has a pretty nice extra damage multiplier. And yeah, it just kind of pops off pretty hard. And if you somehow, for example, add in some extra essence, then you could get even more pops at the same time. So for example, if you reach 120 essence, which might be doable if you, for example, switch out the paragons a little bit, then there's some nodes that give you extra essence or something like that. Then yeah, you could actually get even more out of this. So I might try to min-max this a little bit further. But for now, Soulrift definitely looks like its own viable build on a high end, especially with the Blood Wave Spirit build that you might have seen for Necromancers potentially getting a bit of a nerf, because it's kind of buggy. Also, I'm not sure what will happen to like a pure Bone Spirit build. We'll see, because that seems also relatively overtuned. But I think the Soulrift is not necessarily in nerf territory. So either way, I think Necros are looking pretty strong. There's also other builds you can play outside of those 3 now. So overall, lots of good stuff here. And I had a good time with the Soulrift. Personally, I will also focus a lot on the Spiritborn in the weeks to come, ahead of the expansion launch, and then of course blasting it. But I think the Soulrift stuff is definitely something I want to jump into whenever I can. Hope you liked this video, and I'll see you guys next time.